as Cash was saying, I'm a trained engineer. I'm a civil engineer. I studied at UCT in Cape Town. Very long time ago now. It's beginning to be.
The real definition of build a bridge and get over it.
That is super. I thought I was corny, bro. That is super cheesy, bro.
Sorry.
No, I think you just picked up the age in the room based on that cheesy joke, bro. Yeah.
But yeah,
This is why people need to be coordinated. There's always someone like this one.
Always, bro. Taf is actually gonna bring us back to focus on our own podcast. Yeah.
What sort of properties are we talking here from a design perspective that you were involved in?
So, yeah, I worked on Stain City in its very first phase. We
nice.
did the design for the majority of, in fact, the entirety of that. And I was on site to build that golf course.
And I ask you, have you seen a project where you said this is a disaster? We're not gonna, because I assume you have the option of opting in or out, because the funders and the investors have put this thing together. By the time you guys get involved, is to obviously execute it and etc. etc. So have you got into a place where you get that one and you're like, hey, you don't foresee this one working? Or for the most part, it's almost like you'll never know up until you're in it.
Welcome to episode 31 of the Business Agenda podcast. My name is Cash, also known as Uncle Cash. Thank you, and as always, to those who are going to view this content, we are available on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So in continuing with the theme, for those, when this comes out, you'll have seen episode 30. We are currently running a podcast weekend focusing on 2025 entrepreneurial year, what it's been like for entrepreneurs, and we are sitting down and interviewing entrepreneurs from various spaces. Our next guest is someone I know personally. The previous episode, Mr. Nick Swagger was in that hot seat. So now you can see he's calm, he's got the shades, he's relaxed, he's done his part.
You know.
Exactly, but as
His business is out of business rescue.
it's
Critical but stable.
It's critical. Our wood is now critical but stable. So getting straight into gents, obviously our guest is Mr. Taf Mukwena. He's the CEO of Orion Asset Management. And I know viewers are going to hear that and think asset management and think obviously within the finance space, the space that our co-hosts Maiza, Nico and Tiza play in, but this is a different kind of asset management. So probably the big motivation for me to get him as part of this podcast weekend for entrepreneurs. He's an engineer by profession, someone who, as a group of friends, we highly respect the way he thinks. Engineers have got a very analytical way of thinking. He's that guy when you guys are having nonsensical arguments, he adds a bit of structure to it and brings it full circle. So firstly, welcome to our podcast and thank you for accepting our invite.
Thanks, gents.
No.
Glad to be here.
Glad. So just maybe starting off, just your background. Obviously, you're an engineer, but studies, qualification, career in corporate, and then transitioning to be going your own way. How did that happen?
So yes, I've been
Push it up a bit.
Yeah.
I'm not a podcast regular, so you're gonna have to make sure I get through this properly.
No worries.
But as Cash was saying, I'm a trained engineer. I'm a civil engineer. I studied at UCT in Cape Town. Very long time ago now. It's beginning to be. But immediately after varsity, I became a professional engineer, working in Pretoria actually, the majority of my time. And in the property space, so I understand some of the gents around the room are also in the property space. Been involved in that space for a very long time, helping developers put together packages of property around the country, bringing those into the market. And my role was really on the infrastructure design side, so very much a technical guy. But not very long into my career, I started picking up a little bit of a better understanding of myself. And what became very clear to me, even at varsity, I think, but more so as I started work, is that I am drawn towards organizing for problem solving. So the life of an engineer is really you calculate, you design, you draw, you make it work on the ground, and at some point you get it built. But in order to do that, teams of people have to function in a coordinated fashion with an understanding of the outcome that they're after. And I found myself more and more drawn to managing and getting people around the table to find solutions to do that work.
Is that like project management or like, or can I call it that? Or
yeah,
so coordinating or like
Nico.
Maybe.
I can't hear you.
Yeah, because the
Why?
mic is here. You're
No,
scratching.
when
Yeah.
you talk like
You
this,
talk like
Oh,
this.
just
I
remember.
think
Yeah, and this
Oh.
is from someone who's been podcasting. So Taf, don't even feel bad.
Embarrassing.
So the interesting part about that question is in the engineering space and in the property space, there is the project that belongs to the client and you manage that. Then there's the project of getting that project done, which is an internal function within an organization around how you do that. So in effect, I was managing both.
Internal and external.
Internal team to make sure that's coordinated properly to deliver against the external project requirements. So it's a double pronged thing. And there are often many project managers who only do one or the other. I think I was lucky enough to get the chance to do both mostly at the same time.
What sort of properties are we talking here from a design perspective that you were involved in?
So, yeah, I worked on Stain City in its very first phase.
Oh,
We
nice.
did the design for the majority of, in fact, the entirety of that. And I was
nice.
on site to build that golf course. There's a
Nice.
bridge
Brilliant.
over the river
Yep.
Yes.
that at the golf course.
I think I shanked my shot on that one.
And, in fact, the whole golf course was built while I was on site with some very interesting people. We built that bridge. That was a little bit of a tough job, but we got it done in the end. The majority of the roads.
So you're the real
Water.
definition of build a bridge and get over it.
That is super. I thought I was corny, bro. That is super cheesy, bro.
Sorry.
No, I think you've just picked up the age in the room based on that cheesy joke, bro. Yeah.
But yeah,
This is why people need to be coordinated. There's always someone like this one.
Always, bro. Tav is actually gonna bring us back to focus on our own podcast. Yeah.
no, I like that because that was the real job. And maybe it'll touch on to that point around when we talk about asset management from where I am now. Often people think assets are just financial returns.
Yeah.
So, financial asset management has got a big rep. But the reality is assets are usually real physical items
Items.
in the world.
Like literally on balance sheet. Like
Like
brick and
the
mortar.
thing that's on the balance sheet isn't a number, hopefully. It's a real factory or a car or a building or a piece of land. And at the end of the day, those are real assets. And they're called real assets most of the time.
So you within the engineering space, corporate, how long I know obviously you're Pretoria based, how long were you in full-time employment?
Yep. I think last calculation was like 17 years.
Yeah. Yeah, long stint.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully
And
the
that's
maths is right.
yeah.
Because I was actually going to say, sorry,
No,
Cash, I think you were, because I was interested in your previous point. You were saying you learned something about yourself, and I'm assuming you're driving that towards something. From a point perspective.
And or the point you made about how you learn something about yourself in terms of managing like various stakeholders and getting solutions even as early as varsity. Because I think maybe to re-jog your memory to the point you might have been coming to, one thing we saw in the previous episode and just entrepreneurship in general, there's almost a certain understanding of almost like a knowledge of self journey that you go through that obviously will design like how you chart, whether it's corporate or the entrepreneurship space. So maybe to bring us back to the point, what have you probably learned? What had you learned up to that point in terms of full-time corporate engineering, working with internal and external stakeholders that made you feel that you liked working both sides of like that process? Like you said, some guys only work with the one side of a project, but you just like getting things done. Like what do you think you learned about yourself within that space while you're in corporate?
So I think that's really a much broader question than just purely entrepreneurship. I think if you're making progress in life, you are usually responding to your own inclinations and the things that give you maybe not necessarily stress-free life, but the kind of stress that you can tolerate and enjoy and sometimes forget that you are involved in because you're so immersed in what you're doing.
Yeah.
So when I say I responded to like how I see the world is I often ended up in projects where, yes, I had a responsibility to do the engineering design work, but my role quickly became explaining and understanding how to get this done in a way that either helped the team do the work or clarifies in the mind of the client where we are in the process and what's next and what they need to anticipate from what we're doing. Now, seeing that as something that I do it fairly unconsciously, but if you step back enough, you can realize, okay, but I have certain patterns that I keep repeating and I'm in it and I don't even realize I'm doing it. but it has an effect on how successful we are being. So it just became something I recognized, and seniors, superiors also saw it. So I ended up in certain situations where, even as a young engineer, being given quite unusual levels of responsibility to manage the client and to manage the process, because it became, I think, fairly obvious that that's something that I'm drawn to, but also can do properly.
Okay. 17 years in corporate, that's obviously quite a long stint, and obviously loyal to the game, so to say. What then inspires, or not even inspires, what then brings you to a position where it's okay, it's time to now go the entrepreneurship route? Because I think at that stage, you're probably cemented, you know the space, you're confident in yourself, structures, and there's always that entrepreneurship. What I'm leading up to is something people like to talk about. I want to work for myself. It's got its pros and cons, but some people, if you're that long in corporate with the comforts of benefits and all those things, the risk sometimes becomes a bit larger to step out on your own. So maybe to start with the first question, a bit long-winded, but what inspired you then after that long stint to decide and say, time to branch out and go out on my own as a starting point to entrepreneurship? Yeah.
I'll sort of eventually answer your question, but I think one of the things that I kind of recognize about this discussion about entrepreneurship is we often very much pigeonhole the phrase to mean people who only run their own businesses.
Good point.
And I found in my career, the reason why I could, essentially for the majority of that career, I was with one company, and at no point did I ever feel like I wasn't doing something exciting. So I had the opportunity within that organization to take on roles in different parts of the business. So I worked in the property market, I worked in the transport division, I worked in the water division. I had different levels of responsibility along the way, up until the point I ran a profit and loss center within the business. So I'm responsible for the functioning of a business which has employees, which are distributed around the country. For me, that's business. That was entrepreneurship.
Yes,
correct. Still going to market and finding a way to make enough money that I don't want to close the doors for the people who work for the business.
Good point, yeah.
And running an income statement is actually not easy, to be honest. Even if like to your point, it might not be your own business. Because I think, because we're in banking, we also see it quite a bit, where you kind of get these divisional CEOs and there's multiple guys that obviously they'll be the group person, but everybody takes their specific roles.
Yeah.
Their responsibility quite nice, because it's, sometimes it's like having a team of 50, 100 people and you're responsible for all of it, and you know what I mean? So you're right, that's definitely has to be entrepreneurship.
And I think you've got to recognize that even if you're doing it within a bigger organization, right, if you don't take the responsibility seriously, right, you can't then say you can do it outside if you can't do it inside. So the responsibility remains the same. There are people whose livelihoods depend on the functioning of your business. There are clients whose investment in outcomes depends on your ability to run the business. If you take those things lightly just because you work in a corporate, I don't think there's any possibility that you can transfer yourself to a different place and suddenly become the kind of person who can do that.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. I've never actually thought about entrepreneurship that way, to be honest with you. And because technically what you're saying is that your training as an entrepreneur actually started way, way back then.
Exactly.
Compared to the day you decided to go start your business. Am I understanding you correctly?
That's exactly it. Even going to, I think, further answering your question, Cash, is even during that path, there was an opportunity. A very good friend of mine, we worked together. At one point, we calculated our jump to starting our own business as an engineering company separate from where we were. Did the maths. I remember specifically, I built a little model to calculate the working cash flow requirements to the rands and cents, numbers, months, everything, right? And he eventually left. I stayed. And I think the biggest difference was that, one, he had a larger risk appetite, definitely, and had greater comfort in his own abilities at that point to survive no matter what comes. And he's very successful now. Maybe I'll get him to come and speak to you guys. And what's interesting about that is the business we modeled isn't the business that he's successful at. He still does that, but he's successful at so many other things just because of his level of preparedness at that point. But what it speaks to is, I think people make the mistake that entrepreneurship is also about risk and taking risk. I think it can lull you into a false sense of security that, yes, absorbing and taking on unusually large risks that you have no capacity to resolve for is a smart thing. There's never been a calculation that says to me, taking on a risk you cannot mitigate is smart. By definition, to be a successful
It's called winging it. You wing it.
Literally, yeah.
if
See
you're
what
just going to
happens.
roll the dice,
Yeah.
there's better places to do that. We're not far from Monty's. Over there.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So ultimately, how I ended up stepping out of the corporate environment is, I think, in terms of the risk reward within that organization, what I could gain from still being there in terms of personal development and growth and feeling that I have maximized on my personal potential. I think the returns on that versus the low level of risk of being in a corporate gave me a position where I was of the feeling that I have much more to gain by taking this risk. And I have, like you're saying, grown enough to feel that I've downsided the risk enough to go out there. And what I find very, very essential around my journey towards this is, so I'm married, I've got 2 kids. You've got to take the responsibility so seriously, because if you make this jump and you do it on a I'm winging it basis, there are also dependencies linked to your ability
School
to
fees.
School fees don't stop just because you're having a bad month at the office, you know?
Yeah.
So those things all culminate in getting to a position where you can make that kind of decision. I got there nearly 2 years ago. If anything, probably could have got there a little bit quicker, but I always think about it this way. The moment and the time came when I was best prepared for the decision I had to make.
Yeah. And you know what you're saying resonates quite a lot with me and maybe some people here, because as people who are full-time employed and have other ventures outside of work, the question that we always think about, or that I talk to people about, is when is the right time to actually make the jump into corporate? When should you leave employment? You think exactly about the responsibilities that you're highlighting, and business is not easy. Even when you're still doing it on a part-time basis, it's not easy. You'll have months and months of no success, and so I just wanted to kind of also like just get a little bit more from you in terms of that perspective, right? Like, I know you obviously got you stayed in corporate for quite a while before making the jump, and we'll hear how it's going, obviously, but I want to get your perspective in terms of like what it felt like when you handed in that resignation letter.
That's an interesting question, actually. I remember it fairly well. It was a tough letter to write. I wrote a nice letter.
Technically, it was the first and your last one.
No, it wasn't. So maybe if I give you some background, the business I was working in, I worked there for maybe 8 years. I left once and I came back. And then I worked there again. So this was the second time I've written this letter. And obviously the question around the office was, are you coming back again? I did mention to guys that, okay, no, I think I've gotten as much as I can from here. But so it's not so easy to write that letter because, one, again, I was in a position where I ran and had responsibility for certain people's work life, and for me that's something you have to take very, very seriously. So you don't want to leave them in a situation where they are
in the lurch.
Yeah, that's one. And there's camaraderie. We typically go through the trenches together. We've worked hard, we've achieved things together. So leaving as one of the team members, you know that you're leaving people behind, and that's always going to be a factor. But I think that's testimony to the fact that obviously you've done it properly enough to have relationships that are strong enough to miss.
Yeah.
But at the same time, personally, I was excited about the opportunity because I got to the point where I knew that this is really what I wanted to try and get done. And speaking a little bit to what you're saying, I think at that position where you, as a family man, you make that decision, part of it is also projecting to the kind of future you want your family to have and what you can actually deliver by taking the next step, by finding another environment to grow in and how much growth you can achieve there.
Okay. So,
It's inspirational, man. Oh no, what's up with my wife? We need to talk tomorrow.
Talk to the wife. I had to have that discussion with the missus that we are taking a different turn. And it has volatility, it has risk to it. And if you're not on the same page with the missus, you're gonna have a very tough time because the stress in entrepreneurship is one thing. That stress is then multiplied by the fact that there's a misalignment around
at home. There's no buy-in.
The fact that you're working in a volatile environment, I think you are setting yourself up to really struggle.
Cool. And so from there, obviously, 2 years in of Orion Asset Management, take us through obviously how that came about, partners and the core of what the business does. But maybe let's start with how you decide, okay, you're leaving corporate for this particular opportunity. What stood out for you and what motivated you to get into that space, the space that you're in and what you're doing now?
So at the time I was making this decision around my next move, it's not like I predetermined it. So I'm exploring options and talking to various players in the market to see what's really out there, what are possibilities. And actually through a work relationship that I'd had and people that I'd worked with within that business, we got discussing a venture that they were looking at as investors. And when I mentioned that, okay, I'm trying to make up my mind about my next move, they had what I would call the confidence to say to ask if I was interested in running this business. And the way Orion Asset Management works is essentially there were 3 businesses that had a look at a market that we were mutually in, and identified an opportunity to build a business that would fill that space. And I will get into the details of that. But really, because they were investors, they're involved in their own businesses. They are continuously running those businesses. They felt they needed somebody who could handle that responsibility, build from scratch, and create a brand and a business that fills a gap that very few others are currently doing in the South African context. So I think it's being in the right place, asking the right questions, some good fortune and
timing,
things happen.
Because I think that's one thing I love about entrepreneurs, whether it's local, international, the ones we follow, even when they give TED talks, or we've all been to events where people speak, whether it's from Steve Jobs level, Patrice, at any level, entrepreneurs, township, whatever, one common theme I've always seen is sometimes, despite the education, the grinding, everything that you've done in your own capacity, a lot of it, I don't like to speak to luck, but a lot of it is just timing, like right place, right time. Because you've always, sometimes it sounds too good to be true. Because I remember when I was studying the last qualification, I won't say because it comes with academic snobbery, tinges to it, but the one guy came and he spoke. He was in the insurance space, working with a lot with mines, and what motivated him to go out on his own. Yeah, obviously he'd been in company man for years, but he literally said he had a nice house, wife, kids, private school, but he was having drinks with friends after watching rugby, and they're debating whether should he buy retread tires for his wife's car or new tires. And this is a guy who was high up in corporate, and for him, it's like that was the moment I knew for me that, you know what, as much as I've got the cushion of this job, this is not something I should be haggling with a friend whether I should buy new tires or retread. He said it was the thing that pushed him over, but for years there had been a few that voice getting louder and louder to say people coming to him, offering, people leaving in the same space, going off and doing well, some not working. But then for him, he just thought now is the time because that thing had been nagging. And he thought, you know what, I've done my tenure as well. So I just wanted to highlight that what you do find is there's different ways people get into entrepreneurship outside of corporate. I really like the fact that you highlighted that entrepreneurship is not only in the scope of a business, because we pigeonhole that. And like Nico, I never actually really thought of it like that, but a lot of people are running SBUs in big corporates, and those are big profit and loss centers. To come to Orion Asset Management, you guys are, I know we've chatted, we've met, obviously personal capacity. I was really, really intrigued by how unique and niche the space you're in and how it's future thinking. So maybe just break down start maybe with the space and then obviously can lead to Orion Asset Management, what you guys are doing in that space. Yeah.
I think it was a way of answering to that point. One of the things that I think about a lot is the role of infrastructure in how the world functions, the built environment specifically. And it's always been a piece around how I think about my career. So at the end of the day, you want to be able to leave the game saying or knowing that you've contributed something significant. And for me, infrastructure has been a way of trying to achieve that. And the role of infrastructure in society, I think, sometimes undervalued because people don't realize how much it unlocks, like a country's potential, but I think much more specifically an individual's potential. Like, we were talking about it right now as I was driving here. The fact that the traffic lights were out meant that every person on that road took longer to get to where they were going. That has an impact on your life. That's a real life thing. You never know where the person is going or why they're going there, but that extra time matters for them. So I always think about infrastructure in that way. So one of the prerequisites for me around looking for where my next goals would be in the infrastructure space. And what really stuck out for me around the idea of Orion is that we're at a place right now, both in South Africa, but I think more broadly across the African continent, where unlocking investment in infrastructure becomes the key next step to economic development, to human potential development across the continent. And one example we have in South Africa, which I'm also partly involved in, is around power and energy in South Africa. So when you look at it, what has been achieved, we often talk about how often there's load shedding and whatnot, but what has been achieved in South Africa around getting investment into renewable energy, I think demonstrates like real capacity. Not many places in the world have ever gone to the extent where we've been able to develop utility scale renewable energy projects and bring them on board and plug them into the grid to the extent that we currently have. There's always headaches, there's always ups and downs in these things, and people like to comment on just the negative portion of that. But it is actually quite amazing what we've achieved by getting the amount of power onto the grid that has happened. But the reality is there is capacity for so much more, right? So that's investment from around the world coming into South Africa purely for power and renewables. But we always talk about the logistics chain in South Africa and the issues with Transnet and the fact that money will have to go into that to resolve that leg.
The ports.
Water, ports as well as the terminal point of logistics. Then we talk about the water system and the wastewater treatment infrastructure around the country. Again, another area that is desperately in need of investment in order for it to fulfill its function. Roads and toll roading will always continue to be a part of what South Africa will need, what the rest of Africa will need to be able to move goods and people around the continent. So there's so many regions, so many areas where infrastructure investment is the critical piece around unlocking economic and human potential. And where we sit as Orion is, in order for those projects to realize, inevitably there is a structure to how investment is brought on board. Part of it is the shareholders and the equity providers and the developers of projects really do the imagination piece around conceptualizing what a project will look like, how to get the money into it, how to get the rights for that. The banks will lend into that. A procurer like Eskom or government in some other form will buy into that. And at the end of the day, an entity is formed which hosts what I then call the real asset. In the energy case, that would be a plot of land with solar panels, inverters, cables, transformers, all kinds of equipment.
Can I, before Nico comes in, I'm surprised he's quiet. I'm glad we jumped into infrastructure. Nico sold me a lot of his debts. I don't know why he's quiet.
Yeah, it's
But
interesting.
anyway,
It's interesting.
So maybe let me finalize. So I'm in fixed income, and I buy a lot of stuff from him, from Nico, who's in credit. Just on the infrastructure space, more so on the Joburg water, we know that the infrastructure is dilapidated. I think we've exhausted this subject last year, I think, from a business perspective. So where do you think, how long do you think it will take for Joburg alone to recover? Because, I mean, from a macroeconomic, or maybe from a microeconomic level, what we're seeing is that on a municipal level, we think that this will hinder further development, further growth into the economy. How long do you think that it should take maybe the government to sort out these infrastructure issues? And number two, in terms of solar, do you think it's something that industry is dying down, or do you think it's part of the future going forward? Because I see now, since we don't have load shedding anymore, people no longer talk about inverters, and so. But I still think that, you know what, in order for us to, in order for the country to progress, we need to sort of help ESCOM. So we still need renewable energy. But I see now, because there's no longer load shedding. Yeah. That was just a two-part question. I'll just to focus more into the infrastructure. I know Nico has a lot of questions.
So to answer the first one around, so the city of Joburg and trying to get the standard of municipal life a little bit better, right? I'm usually of the opinion that changing things like that can happen fairly quickly, in the sense that the first change you have to have is around the mindset of people, right? So the mindset of people involved in resolving the issue. And having throughout my career worked with municipal employees as counterparties to property or any infrastructure process, I think one thing that is really critical is getting people who work in that environment motivated to be able to execute the work they do. And I think a big impediment right now is that because of how we've structured municipalities, it's very difficult for somebody to want to go there and be highly driven. There are just like some structural elements that make it difficult for even highly driven people to be highly driven in that environment. And those kinds of things can change fairly quickly, because that, going back to the point I was making about when you're in a leadership role within an organization, you can change the attitude of people simply by stating that this is an environment where I expect the best from you. I'm willing to make it possible for you to come into the office today and be your best. If that could happen in a municipal environment, I think you would see significant change fairly quickly, because the things that would make visible difference in a city like Joburg would be traffic lights. So how long does it take to fix a traffic light? About half a day, right? So how many crews do I need? We have half a day. We have 2 traffic lights that they fix a day. I'm sure we can get that done. You fix them, but you fix them well enough that I don't have to refix them again next week. Then those same crews, where else do I want to go? Potholes. How long does it take to fix a pothole? Probably about the same time. Maybe I can fit in four sites in a day. Then you get that done. And what that instantly does is, from the citizen's point of view, seeing things being fixed. So not everything is fixed, but visibly seeing things being fixed gives you the impression that things are fixable. And that already is a big step.
Like Twane. Twane has renewed his hope into municipalities, you know.
And then it breeds a culture within the environment of the municipality, right, where people are used to seeing themselves achieving things being done. And if that becomes the norm, then every day you come into the office and you get something done. It's just what we do now. Like we come and
Culture
get things
change.
done and let's go. And you would see that starting to have an impact. And Joburg won't be fixed beautifully in a day, but it'll feel better. Feeling better is quite a significant step around fixing that.
Yeah, and
then
the solar part, yeah.
The second part of your question is really around the depth of the market for renewables. It's something I've had to get my head around, but ultimately, if you think about it, the story is bigger than load shedding, right? It's not, so for each of us, right, it's about lights at my house, but at a economic level, economic structure level, it's really about global competitiveness of your exports. And South Africa has been built around the fact that it is trying to be an industrialized country. It does export large quantities of raw minerals and outside of the country and some manufactured goods. To be globally competitive going forward, your ability to market those goods as having been produced with very low carbon footprint is an essential part of still being in business. So the remainder of the development and the depth of that market is going to be driven by the fact that our industries need to make themselves green in order to be able to sell to Europe, in order to be able to sell to anywhere else in the world increasingly. So there's a long tail to that investment game. I don't think we're anywhere near the end of it.
So it's quite interesting what you say, right? I want to get more understanding in terms of where your business actually fits in properly, right? I'm from the other side, right? So I see a lot of the deploying of cash. I'm one of those guys who do that part, but that's it for me, right? So it's interesting to talk to you to see what then happens, because once the so obviously once the deployment has happened, like on the various projects that we've participated in, it's more about the returns and who's the off taker. That's our concern with Eskom more than whether they're going to give us electricity, whether they're going to pay us. So for example, so I wanted to understand exactly your input into this whole value chain, because speaking to you now, I actually get the sense that like you're just completing the full circle in terms from a funding perspective and the actual
assets.
Assets, yeah.
So I think you are probably then the reason why a business like Orion is essential. Part of the structuring around how to bring finance into infrastructure requires the developers of projects to create an entity that can hold the risks and the obligations against which the capital must be deployed. So the bank's lawyers have basically told these developers, when you do this project, we don't want you to blend the risks around this project with every other project in your portfolio. We want this as a ring-fenced entity, and we want it to hold both the funding, so the equity and the debt, plus the obligations, plus the assets, in order for it to deliver against the agreements that create revenue. That entity is typically a special purpose vehicle company, set up in terms of the CIPC regulations. Typically, it's a ring-fenced entity. If you know the regulations, they speak to a ring-fencing entity. What Orion is built around is running the full enterprise that is a special purpose vehicle. Right? So a special purpose vehicle is a business like any other business. It has obligations around its compliance to company law, its compliance and requirements around
Shareholders,
BE, shareholder reporting,
taxes,
data reporting, financial management, but more importantly, around the obligations that create revenue. So it builds an asset, physical asset. It then runs that asset and invoices the services delivered by that asset for typically a 20-year, 25-year term, and then delivers enough cash to pay back the bank so that no one shuts it down.
So in a nutshell, Taf, you need to be a fund manager. You're a fund manager of that SPV. I'm referring so because one of my clients, won't mention them, they have a similar structure to what you just described, and it's actually quite interesting for you to break it down to. So on that level.
And the way I always think about this is in that value chain around getting an investment done in infrastructure. Typically, you have developers and sponsors, right? A developer is someone who sits there and says, this is possible, and I'm going to put the pieces together to get this done and over the line. And it actually is a very specific skill set, right? Around putting the rights together in order for a project to exist. Sponsors are around bringing in the financing, especially the equity portion, in a way that allows debt to also flow into the project. Now, if your sponsors and your developers have worked together and gotten a project to the point where funding can flow, is their skill set necessarily the one that then generates the revenue and the return inside the operating entity? It's a totally different game, right?
Yeah.
One is around putting together the rights in order for the project to exist. One is around finding, deploying equity and debt. Then the next part is around, can I make sure that this thing just does what it's meant to every single day?
Execution.
Wake up and we do what we're meant to do. And then we charge for it. And then we get paid for it. And then we pay back all the people who made this happen.
Yeah.
So the point of a business like Orion is that you divide the requirements for infrastructure investment so that people play in the game that they're good at. Developers develop, sponsors and equity providers provide the equity and fund it and find it and build it. But when it comes time to make sure things deliver, that's the part that we come in.
Yeah, I look at a few proposals from all of these people, and particularly outside of South Africa, the common issue is you are the missing piece, because there's a key risk in execution in everything. Like, we get all these presentations from sponsors and developers, but the execution component, once a project has been completed, that's when actually the risk exists from a repayment perspective and just the delivery perspective.
Yes.
If you're delivering renewable energy back into the grid or whatever the case is, like, that's actually the key risk, the critical piece from an assessment perspective. So you are effectively saying that although there will be management in the actual SPV to run the SPV, you guys will then oversee everything. Is that kind of, will you guys act as like a shareholder, or like just in a practical sense? Like, who do you guys act as in a corporate?
What you normally find, the developer, or typically the sponsors, become shareholders in this enterprise. The most, I guess, to put it politely, the most important shareholder is whichever banks have put in the debt, because they put in the vast majority of the money in there. What Orion will do, what I will do, is then be the management inside the SPV. Right? So there are corporate IPPs in the energy space who have set up a business that runs multiple SPVs, but they are then a channel only for their investment. Whereas there's investors outside of the IPP space who have an interest in infrastructure. So we would provide them the management that sits inside of the SPV, effectively running that business, making sure it does all the things it needs. And a critical part of that business is, outside of the normal corporate responsibilities, it will normally have within it two key contracts. One is a build contract of some sort that says, can we put the asset onto the ground? And somebody has to make sure that the counterparty, the person who's meant to build it, builds it the right way. And we have a record of that. They've built it and they've delivered it, and therefore we have an asset, because that is the asset. Then post-build, there is an operating contract. Somebody somewhere has been brought on and put in charge of making this thing deliver what it does. So if it's power, it is making sure that every day it delivers power into the grid. If it's water, making sure that the water is taken out of the source, cleaned, and delivered into pipelines. They've got to do that job. From the SPV side, we are the counterparty to those agreements. So my responsibility then becomes, are we making sure that those parties on the other side of these agreements are executing to the standard required for us to generate a return?
Okay.
Makes sense. I was gonna ask, so do you have many clients or few key clients?
So really, we are in the startup space. It's a 2-year business. And where we're headed is, our business won't have loads of contracts. We won't have lots of contracts. What it will have is a set of specific contracts for investors who are either in a position where they don't want to set up a corporate that does this on their own behalf. They
Like a
want to
SPV.
focus on their game,
Yeah.
which is developing or investing, and then we step in and assist them. Or as an extension to existing corporate IPPs or corporate asset holders who find that in this market, there is a constraint around their ability to fully employ a team that can deliver the service. So what you'll find is purely on a, now I'm getting into the nuts and bolts of it, right? But because of the way you have to run an SPV, in most cases you'll find I can't house a full team just to sit on one SPV and then feel that they're fully utilized. So if I don't have a depth of assets that I can deploy them meaningfully on, it means that I start to carry a working capital cost that is not matching the kind of business structure that we've created in that SPV. So we give you the ability to have management, have skilled management that I distribute across projects, so that you don't have to then carry a working capital load that's unstructured to or unmatched to the structure of your SPV.
I'm gonna delve a bit more. My colleague and the guy who gave us this beautiful Airbnb, Kenny, is here. He'll like this question. You guys, it's a sustainability question, because you guys are more impact investing, right? Basically, in terms of you make sure that whatever you guys your SPV is busy with affects the environment or the society in a positive way. Like if you guys are gonna do water or road infrastructure or maybe solar buildings, whatever, you make sure that it's green. Do you decide how do you wanna impact the environment? Does it also, in terms of funding, does it also affect you? Because I know sustainability is a word that's flowing around in the industry. Kenny will also like that question. Yeah. Do you decide, like, if I'm gonna be part of Stain City, we're gonna make sure Stain City infrastructure, we're gonna make sure that it's green in terms of like we make sure that there's water sustainability, or in terms of electricity, we know that the gates at the entrance are solar, or there's backup power. Do you guys, from Orion's perspective, do you guys decide how you want to impact the society or the environment positively?
So I think where we sit, if you're running an SPV, typically the business model has been covered in the process of getting the finance
Funding.
raised,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think one thing, well, two parts to that answer is, if you look at the energy space, how government has structured the procurement of energy for the purposes of the state requires that each project makes commitments to economic development objectives, right? And what then becomes our responsibility in running that SPV is those commitments, one, do come with penalty, but realizing those commitments is a job, right? Somebody physically has to say, okay, where we've committed to spend this much money in this community for, early childhood development or for adult education, we actually do it, right? And we do it ideally in a meaningful way. So there are different ways to spend that money, but if you try and do it, in the case of the history within the market, right? If you haven't set up an organization that says we run this SPV with expertise, then you might end up doing that in a very haphazard way. The point of being then professionally driven towards running SPVs is that we would be creating a structure that says this focus on meeting your obligations, meeting them in a way that makes sense. One, because it supports the brand. Whoever the owners are, the investors are, it should support the brand that they have so that they have an opportunity to continue to invest in other infrastructure. I think we're finding now with ESG, most banks have structures around the cost of finance being slightly lower depending on your ability to deliver against ESG requirements. So it now has a return function to it, because failing to meet those means you don't have access to the right kind of cost for your finance. So that becomes a part of how we do it. I think over and above that, there's a personal opinion now, is typically the structure of infrastructure is that it's geared towards benefit. You're not going to build a water treatment plant not for benefit, if you know what I mean. It has its purpose, and that's what attracts me to it. Is designed for an impact that is positive to society. And so I think there is embedded in just doing the normal things well has an impact, and it's a social impact. Clean water is not something that you can laugh about. I think if you think about it, clean water has an impact, for instance, on infant mortality, right? So how are you going to make a bottle of milk, formula milk, without clean water? It's not possible. Yes, so you can try the boiling and the whatnot, but if society is structured in a way that we can deliver clean water to people anywhere in the country, we make keeping children alive just easier. That's what it's for. You know, sometimes as engineers, we're kind of detached from the end point, but the end point is that water gets to people for a specific reason, and it's things like, can a mother make her child water?
So sorry, I wanted to say this to Maza. In our property space, what we're seeing when you do some of the green stuff is, let's say if you fund a project that's 100 million, usually they'll get about 4% back if it's green and it's ticked by Green Star, etc., and that's the real tangible benefit. So someone will spend 4 million, and then I think it's World. I don't know if it's World Bank or one of these international forums that they'll actually give the guys, if you spend 100 million, they'll give you 4 million and reduce your loan. That is a direct impact of actually being green. So it does actually like create a return from a yeah.
Yeah, my question is, something slightly removed from what we're talking about now, but in a practical sense, when you're doing the actual work, there are a lot of issues in South Africa, man, particularly on the construction infra. Once the actual asset exists, do you ever see like a construction mafia where things can't happen? Like, because sometimes people are actually getting paid for plants to run, or for some, people go and mess up the water treatment plant
Sabotage.
to get water supplied in tanks and all of that. Do you guys ever encounter some
like
operational issues?
Intentionally created bottlenecks, basically.
So, I mean, the majority of my life I was in normal infrastructure projects, and a big part of consulting engineering, you end up on the build side of it. In that environment, I think it's unusually common. Let me put it that way. There's always issues. It's become a part of the fabric of the construction industry in South Africa.
What do you call that line item when you're doing the funding?
Usually I don't create line
In the spreadsheet.
It's cost of sales.
Because you can't just put it as cost. You can't put cost of doing business in your line items.
Unfortunately, I don't have to play in that realm. I think construction companies are in a very tough position because they have to deal with that in a very, very real and live manner.
And strategic.
And they're exposed to the risk around that. I think from just my career, what we've always done is you've got to find a way of, the way I always looked at it, and maybe I'll explain a little bit, is, and it still applies today, right, in the context of Orion, is whoever your counterparties are in those contracts, the purpose of us being around the table is that there is an objective to deliver against. So in the construction space, it is, we want you to build this thing because it has a job to do, and we want it on time, and we want it within budget because it has a job to do, right? So you've got to work with your contractors in a way that helps them achieve those objectives, which means understanding the scenario and the situation in which they have to work, understanding it well enough that you don't make it harder. Right? And it's the same thing within the SPV management environment. Those counterparties that you have, the purpose of their function is to deliver an asset in a way that allows it to fulfill its function. Again, understanding well enough what that counterparty is trying to do so that you can either be understanding enough or demanding enough to ensure that the right things get done. Literally, I look at it that way, is that my job is to understand well enough what everyone else needs to be doing so that I can create leeway for things to happen, but sometimes be very demanding and expect and insist
on deliverables. Yeah.
Okay.
and you do that on behalf of the project and on behalf of the
Yeah,
people.
can I ask? So as an agreement, do your clauses have negative performance, or has it happened? Because the SPV is set up for this purpose and it needs to work. And what happens if it doesn't work?
So usually you'll see, again, probably mostly driven by the banks, is in those contracts you try and distribute the risk to the places that are closest to the management of risk. So you'll find in your EPC agreements or your operating agreements, a lot of risk is distributed down to those entities, and they then carry penalties around non-performance. The way I always think about it, from a business point of view, in terms of getting return, when you get to the point where your contractors are in penalty, you've already created an unusual risk within the performance of your SPV. So I want you to perform. I benefit from your performance. Your lack of performance, even if I don't have a financial cost to it, the cost is accruing somewhere. It's going to be in time, it's going to be in cost, it's going to be in revenue forsaken, it's going to be in legal costs. Somewhere along the line, if there's an underperformance by an underlying contractor within this situation, we are accumulating risk on behalf of the SPV. So again, it speaks to that point around, you might not find in the SPV that it holds a lot of the cost risk, penalty risk in itself, but it's still better off having everyone perform. At the end of the day, the bank will call and say, we can see your contractor's broke, but that doesn't change the fact that
because I was going to ask you, have you seen have you seen the project where you said this is a disaster, we're not gonna, because I assume you have the option of opting in or out, because the funders and the investors have put this thing together. By the time you guys get involved, is to obviously execute it and etc. etc. So have you got into a place where you get that one and you're like, hey, you don't foresee this one working, or for the most part it's almost like you'll never know up until you're in it?
The way I look at that, most things will work,
It should work.
but there will be a cost.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really comes down to that, right? So if you find you don't have a contractor anymore, there will be a cost to replace that contract. You might get a better one.
Yeah.
Are you able to pay the cost?
Yeah, it's a good question you're asking, Teaser, because I'm just thinking, how do they then get it wrong at like ESCOM, for example, with the Midupi or whatever, when they were developing Kusile, you have the spec here and then something else got delivered, or things changed along the lines, or the Transnet locals where the things don't match the size of the actual track is not the same. So how, like, to Teaser's question, someone delivers that and then you in it, is that like, that's a kind of like, yeah. Oh, firstly, how do people get that stuff like that wrong? You're the only engineer here, so we are pinning it to you.
So how do those things go wrong? Projects are difficult. I think we sometimes underestimate that. And a power plant project is particularly difficult, right? It's difficult in many ways, right? There's technical complexity, there's contractual complexity, there's human resources complexity, there's logistical complexity.
I'll say government on your behalf.
Interestingly, like, I mean, on a project like Madupi, when you say government, I look at government as state, right? Is not really involved. ESCOM is a business. They wanted somebody to build them a power station, and they put out a contract to try and do that. Yeah. And they thought they appointed somebody who could do it. And in the process, things accumulated that made it very difficult to deliver on time. And someone in the mix usually has to make certain really difficult decisions, right? Because it's inevitable that projects will face difficulties. And the only way to fix those difficulties is to make decisions. What's particularly difficult in certain kinds of organizations is, where does decision responsibility sit? So who's going to make the call? And are they feeling, within the context of the organization, safe enough to make a call that could be wrong, but is the right thing to try and do
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
And one thing I often say to people is that we often diagnose decisions by their consequences.
Yeah.
But the reality is the way you analyze a decision is when you made it with the information available, did you do the best that was possible?
Yeah.
The
You
outcome
don't
might
have
be
the
terrible.
benefit of hindsight.
Yes. So normally what I'd expect to have found, I'm not an expert on those power plant projects, is that along the way where certain decisions had to be made, either someone didn't decide or didn't decide in time, so that's also a quality of a decision, whether it's made in the right time frame, whether it was the right decision, whether it was well informed. Those are the kinds of things I would expect to see if I review that project. Is someone should have decided at that point but they didn't, or somebody decided at that point but they were underinformed,
Or right decision too late.
or somebody who should have informed them withheld information for fear of repercussions. Those kinds of things typically happen inside of projects. And then there is the bigger thing is not everyone can handle complexity. Right?
Yeah.
It's just this,
Simple.
that's how it is, right?
Yeah.
I find myself drawn to complexity. I enjoy it because it feels like a puzzle, almost like a little kid putting a puzzle together. I want to find the pieces that fit and how they fit so that I know what the picture is, right? That kind of thinking is required in projects because somebody has to know why everything moves the way it does. Because when you make a decision in one place, it flows through the organism that is a project and has outcomes in different places. You try your best to anticipate those outcomes and how that decision flows through so that you can make that decision. That is what making a decision is. Can I anticipate enough of the consequences of this so that I can decide whether this is the right course of action today?
Sure. Final question. It's
I'm
not
also
every
gonna
day.
ask you.
It's not every day that I get to ask chill next to an engineer, right? But I want to get your understanding, just in general, because we speak about this so much, right? Do you think IPPs are the way to go to resolve the energy crisis in South Africa? Firstly, is basically the question is, can we fix Eskom with renewable energy? Or should we, and versus coal? Just a general question. It's just an opinion.
Across life, doesn't matter where you go, I've never found a scenario where there's only one perfectly right solution.
Yeah.
It's just like, find me that. If you find it, you can convince me. But I've yet to find a scenario where there's only one answer that perfectly works and accounts for all the requirements of a situation. So bear in mind that supplying energy to a country as large and as diverse in terms of requirements for that energy and their uses as South Africa could not possibly have one solution. It's just, it doesn't make sense that would be the case. So you're going to have to find the right blend of all of the potential sources that respond to what South Africa is like. And what makes that a complex decision is what South Africa is like today is not what South Africa will be like in 5 years' time. And it's not what South Africa will be like in 35 years' time. The nature of infrastructure investments is that you make a decision today and you have to live with it for a very long time. There is no reverse, huh? It's not like you build a nuclear power station and then halfway through you stop. Or you unbuild it.
Yeah. So I was gonna say, Nico, out of interest, because he actually you explained it earlier. But maybe just to maybe just clarify it a little bit for people. So if you make a product and we make this product and there's two of them, the one that's from South Africa is made from coal. Then it has more
Environmental.
carbon, whatever. And then another one from another country is not made from coal, it's maybe made from clean energy. That's better. Yes. There's other countries will buy that one over the South African one. That's the crisis that the coal has created to South Africa. It says our products they're not globally competitive. That's something we have to take into account. Of course, there's execution and things like that. We have natural resources, blah, blah, blah. But the competitiveness of our products in the global market is what's at risk because other countries are doing it using clean energy. and that's a big thing.
I'm not pro coal, by the way.
Yeah, sure. So I had two quick questions. So your business is 2 years old. Out of interest, how what's the staff complement like? Is it small, big, medium?
It's consulting.
It's small. So the way we're structured now, and again, this is my financial hat. So I'm also qualified in finance. I did a finance degree. It's really around working capital management.
Yeah.
So the point is to only give costs into our clients as and when they're required.
Okay.
So the structure I have, fortunately with the 3 shareholders that are in the business, is that they carry a staff complement that I draw upon in order to deploy onto projects.
Okay.
And the idea around that is, again, that utilization question that I was speaking about earlier. It won't make sense to build a business that carries an overhead, which I then have to recover, because that's what I'm trying to avoid for my clients.
Okay.
So we flex our manpower on that basis. And the nice thing with our business is that the shareholders bring expertise that are directly relevant to the project environment. So it's project finance investor. There's a technical, renewable energy technical investor. There's one that's on the ESG and social side. And those are the components of what we bring to the table in terms of running an SPV. So I pull those personnel into my projects and we deploy on that basis.
Interesting.
And the rest of it, I bring from my track record. Being able to run a normal business, being able to understand infrastructure outside of just the purely renewable environment. So across logistics, road, water, those are areas that I bring into the table as well.
Yeah, okay. And then another one is
As we wrap up.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask 2 questions. The other one is just around Africa. If you guys are operating that space or not yet. The last question is this worth it financially? The decision you took in the space that you're in.
Okay. Yeah. So yes, I think when I'm dreaming about where the business will end up, outside of South Africa is definitely a major play. One, because I think it's fairly clear in my mind that there will be inflows of infrastructure investment into the African continent, and the purpose of the business is to enable that. So I'll happily chase that where it's possible. I think I apply a practical hat to that. You've got to look at where can I deliver effectively, and try and make sure your arms aren't too long for you to be able to keep under control. But yeah, as the business grows, I'm definitely targeting that we grow further and further afield outside of South Africa as well. And then to your question, and maybe I think speaking about the theme you guys are running around entrepreneurship, it isn't yet giving me everything that I would want, but I think that's part of the process. Right? So I'm a fairly ambitious person. I'm expecting a lot from what we're going to build with Orion, and one day it will be a significantly large business that does business across the continent. So I'm not at that point yet, but that's part of the journey. That's how we move.
Fantastic. This is amazing, man.
Yeah, man.
This was lovely. Yeah.
This was a great episode. I think what we had planned and what we thought, just in you sharing your story, you've covered all the facets of questions we had. And I think one thing I'm just going to reach.
I think Nico's going to quit.
It's going to go.
I blame you.
It's going to go. It's going to go home, talk to the wife, get buy-in, and then quit. No, but the one point I want to reinforce in closing, Taf, I just really like the fact that you brought out a perspective, like Nico and I said, that we never really thought of, that entrepreneurship is not pigeonholed in you live a full-time 9 to 5 and you have your own business. And as you talk, as someone also who's in the recruitment space, it's funny to me, I never click like that. There's so many people we place in corporates who are heads of SBUs, critical parts of corporates, banks, mining companies who...
What is SBU?
Separate business unit. Yeah, so like it could be at card division, so they call it SBU. So it's from job specs. So the thing with that is it's a good way to think, because I just want to motivate the point to people who are going to watch that. Look, you can be an entrepreneur within that context where you don't it doesn't take anything away from you where you have to specifically leave, register your own company, because just listening to your story, just the lives you impacted, and you're quite intentional and talk about all your decisions were not willy-nilly, because they were people's livelihoods and existences, investors, shareholders, and your team, and the camaraderie built around that. It's all community-based, and it's almost a chasm of, call it a community within a corporate, because then the impact is also then outside, and then it tied nicely with everything you're saying about how impacting the decisions you make. It starts with you as a person running a team, and don't downplay how you might think how small that is, but team, each household is taking care of people within that space or community, and families similar to your infrastructure background. So it painted a very nice picture of how decisions can be made, and entrepreneurship is not just bottled to doing your own thing. But no, this was a great episode. I was looking at the time when we started, and I'm just like, as we're going on now, I understand why my colleagues had so many questions, but thank you so much, Taf.
Thanks a lot.
We really appreciate it. Great episode, so many gems. Looking forward to sharing this and letting the viewers see exactly what you're about, your space you're in. And also, one thing we're big on this platform in closing is we like to watch people's journeys. So as Orion's building, and we're also building on our side as a platform, maybe touch base with another 2-3 years, just milestone checks, see where you are beyond our entrepreneurship theme, just you and the space as well, because I'm really passionate on the renewable energy space. And like you said, it's not any one solution that can solve for anything. And on that note, this has been episode 31 of the Business Agenda podcast. We're available on YouTube. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment. I remember to say that for the sake of my co-host, Miser. Please share the podcast within your circles. We appreciate your spins. And thank you to our host for the weekend, Mr. Kenny. Maybe at some point in the weekend, we just show his face on camera. If not, we're just going to keep mentioning. But thank you so much, and we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.
Peace. Big and more.